Widowed rancher found an Apache woman being dragged to a hanging tree by 40 angry men, but Thomas Brennan had just buried his wife, and he recognized the look in the woman's eyes, the same quiet dignity Sarah had shown while dying. Thomas Brennan rode into Millbrook for supplies, nothing more. Salt, flour, maybe coffee if Henderson's store had any left. His ranch sat 12 miles north, far enough from people that he could grieve Sarah in peace, close enough that he couldn't disappear completely from the world she'd loved. But as he turned onto Main Street, the crowd hit him like a fist to the gut. 40 men with faces twisted by something ugly, moving like a pack of wolves. Torches flickered in the bright daylight. Someone had rope already thrown over the big oak that stood in the town square. In the center of the mob they had her, Apache woman, young, maybe 23, with long black hair now tangled with dirt and blood. Her buckskin dress was torn at the shoulder where rough hands had grabbed her. Her wrists were bound with hemp rope that had already rubbed them raw. But she wasn't broken, even with blood trickling from her split lip, even surrounded by men baying for her death. She stood straight with dark eyes that held no tears, no begging, just a terrible, quiet strength that reminded Thomas of Sarah's final weeks when she faced the fever with more courage than he'd ever possessed. "Poison the Hartley well," Joe Mitchum was shouting, the noose coiled in his meaty hands. 4 children dead, 6 more dying. Apache witch got what she deserved coming to her. The crowd roared approval. These were men who'd lost too much to drought, to sickness, to the grinding failure of dreams. They needed someone to blame, and she was perfect, different, defenseless, convenient. Sheriff Walsh stood at the edge of the mob, wringing his hands like an old woman. "Now, boys, maybe we should wait for Judge Morrison. He'll be through next month." "Month, hell," someone shouted back. "She'll poison every well between here and Santa Fe by then." That's when her eyes found Thomas across the sea of hate, and just for a heartbeat, their gazes locked as he saw something there that stopped his breath. Not guilt, not fear, but recognition of someone who knew she was going to die and was facing it the way Sarah had faced the fever, with dignity intact. Thomas dismounted without thinking, muscle memory from 20 years of making hard choices. He pushed through the outer ring of the mob, his presence cutting through their noise like a blade. "What evidence you got?" he heard himself saying. Every face swung toward him, men he'd known since before the war, neighbors who'd helped him bury Sarah just 3 months ago. Now they looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "Evidence?" Joe Mitchum's laugh was ugly. "Brennan, grief's made you simple. Apache shows up Tuesday, children start dying Wednesday. What more evidence a Christian man need?" Thomas stepped deeper into the circle, close enough now to see the rope burns on the woman's wrists and the bruises on her throat where someone had already tried choking answers out of her. Close enough to see that her eyes weren't the eyes of a killer, but the eyes of someone who'd loved and lost, just like him. "The kind that would stand up in court," Thomas said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd survived Gettysburg and 3 Apache raids. "The kind that separates us from the animals we're trying to protect ourselves from." Pete Carson shouldered forward, whiskey on his breath and failure in his eyes. His own farm had gone under the year before. His wife had taken the children back east. "You gone soft, Brennan? Maybe burying your woman scrambled your thinking." The mention of Sarah hit Thomas like a physical blow. His hand dropped to the Colt at his hip, fingers wrapping around the grip that had saved his life a dozen times. The crowd saw the movement, felt the shift in the air. "Anyone touches this woman," Thomas said, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper, but carrying more menace than any shout, "answers to me." The silence that followed was complete. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The mob wavered. Thomas Brennan wasn't just any grieving widower. He'd come back from the war with scars that ran deeper than skin, had killed men who needed killing, survived things that broke lesser souls. Even grief hollowed, he wasn't someone you crossed lightly. But Joe Mitchum had tasted blood, and he wasn't backing down easy. "1 man against 40, Brennan. You think your reputation's worth dying for some Apache witch?" think my soul's worth more than watching innocent blood spill," Thomas replied, never taking his eyes off Joe's face. "You so sure she's guilty? Let's hear the evidence. Real evidence, not just fear and whiskey talk." That's when Dr. Harrison pushed through from the back of the crowd. The town's only physician looked sick, his face pale and sweaty despite the afternoon air. "Joe, maybe we should listen to him." "What?" Joe spun around, his face twisting with betrayal. "Doc, you examined those children yourself, saw what that poison did to them." Dr. Harrison's hands shook as he removed his spectacles, cleaning them with nervous movements. "I examined them, yes, but Joe, what I found, it wasn't poison from a well." The crowd's roar died to confused murmuring. Thomas felt something shift in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. "The symptoms," Dr. Harrison continued, his voice gaining strength, "they weren't consistent with water poisoning. The children who died, they all ate at the same place, Murphy's Kitchen behind the saloon. Bad meat, spoiled in this heat. Food poisoning, not well poisoning." The silence that followed was different now. Not the tense quiet of impending violence, but the hollow sound of certainty crumbling, as men who'd been ready to commit murder moments before now shifted uncomfortably, avoiding each other's eyes. "But she was at the well," someone called out weakly. "Getting water," Dr. Harrison replied, "same as any traveler would." Thomas pulled out his knife, the blade catching the bright sunlight. With careful, precise movements, he cut through the hemp rope binding the woman's wrists. She rubbed the raw skin where the rope had bitten, but still said nothing. Free now, she stood even straighter. Blood still marked her face. Her dress was still torn, but something in her bearing commanded respect. She looked at Thomas with eyes that held gratitude mixed with wariness. Trust didn't come easy when you'd been betrayed by the world. Joe Mitchum's face had gone purple with frustrated rage. "Doc's lying. Apache witch probably put a spell on him, too. We can't let her go. Spread more poison. Kill more children." But the crowd was breaking apart now, men drifting away in twos and threes, sudden shame replacing their bloodlust. Nobody wanted to be part of a lynching when doubt had crept in. Thomas placed his hand gently on the woman's elbow, guiding her toward where his horse waited. She allowed the touch, but remained alert, ready to run if this kindness proved false. "You got a name?" Thomas asked quietly as they walked. "Ayanna," she said, her first word since he had arrived. Her voice was hoarse from the choking, but clear, strong. "Ayanna," Thomas repeated, tasting the unfamiliar syllables. "Ayanna, I'm Thomas. You got somewhere safe to go?" She shook her head once, short and sharp. Her people were scattered, driven from their traditional lands. She'd been traveling alone, vulnerable, when the sickness struck the town and she'd become a convenient scapegoat. Thomas looked back at the dispersing crowd, at the rope still hanging from the oak tree, at the faces that wouldn't meet his eyes. Then he looked at Ayanna, saw the exhaustion in her shoulders, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. "My ranch is 12 miles north," he said. "You can rest there, heal up, figure out what comes next." They rode north through country that had seen too much blood, too much loss. The desert stretched endless in all directions, baked by the bright afternoon sun. Thomas led his horse on foot, while Ayanna rode, her injuries making walking difficult. The Brennan Ranch sat in a shallow valley protected by low hills. The house was simple, weathered gray by wind and sun, but built solid. A windmill turned lazily beside the barn, and a vegetable garden Sarah had planted still struggled against the harsh soil. Inside, Thomas lit a lantern against the dimming afternoon light. The house felt too big now, too empty. Sarah's sewing still sat in a basket by her chair. Her favorite coffee cup still waited on the shelf. 3 months wasn't long enough to erase a life shared. Ayanna settled carefully at the kitchen table, every movement precise and guarded. She watched Thomas move around the familiar space, heating water, gathering clean cloth for her wounds. Her dark eyes missed nothing, cataloging every detail, every potential escape route. By lamplight, Thomas cleaned the blood from her split lip, the rope burns on her wrists. His touch was gentle but impersonal, the way he might tend an injured horse. Ayanna allowed it without flinching, though he could feel the tension coiled in her like a spring. "Why?" she asked suddenly, the single word cutting through the quiet like a knife. Thomas paused, cloth dripping water back into the basin. Why indeed? Why risk his life for a stranger? Why care what happened to one Apache woman when the world was full of injustice he couldn't fix? "My wife," he said finally. "Sarah. She died 3 months ago. Fever took her slow over 2 weeks. Near the end she got delirious, thought the neighbors were trying to hurt her. Kept begging me not to let them take her, not to let them hurt her. She was scared, confused, helpless." "I see her in your eyes," Ayanna said softly. "Same fear, but you are not helpless." They ate beans and hardtack in companionable silence, 2 damaged souls finding unexpected peace in each other's presence. The lamp flickered between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls where Sarah's presence still lingered, like a blessing. Iona stood by the window looking out at the sun-drenched landscape. Her people read stories in the earth and sky, legends of heroes and spirits, and the endless dance between light and darkness. "My village," she said without turning around. "Soldiers came last spring, said we were dangerous, that settlers complained about us. Burned everything, killed the old ones, the children. I ran." Thomas knew that story. Not the details, but the shape of it. He'd seen what fear could make people do, how quickly neighbors could become enemies when times got hard and someone needed to blame. "Been running ever since," Ayanna continued. "Thought maybe if I stayed away from white towns, white people, I could be safe. But there is nowhere they will not find reasons to hate." They sat on the porch steps under the wide afternoon sky, sharing the weight of their losses. The day was warm, desert air carrying scents of sage and distant rain. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel empty to Thomas. "You can stay, long as you need. This place is big enough for 2 people carrying too much grief." Ayanna looked at him, studying his face in the bright daylight. "White man who saves Apache woman. Your neighbors, they will not understand." "Let them not understand. I'm done caring what people think when they're wrong." The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm neither of them had expected. Ayanna proved skilled with healing herbs, tending the vegetable gardens Sarah had left behind. Thomas worked the few cattle he still kept, mended fences, prepared for winter that would come too soon. She didn't speak much, but her presence filled the empty spaces in the house like water filling a dry riverbed. She cooked meals that tasted like hope, swept away the dust that had settled over everything since Sarah died. When riders appeared on the horizon one morning, Thomas taught Ayanna to use his old rifle, not because he expected trouble, but because she'd been helpless once and refused to be again. Her hands were steady, her aim true. She learned quickly, like someone who understood that survival depended on being ready. They worked side by side, rebuilding what grief had let fall apart. Not just the ranch, but something in themselves. The sharp edges of loss began to smooth, not disappearing, but becoming bearable, like stones worn smooth by a patient river. In the evenings they talked, not about the past at first, but about small things, the weather, the horses, the way the light fell different each day as autumn approached. Slowly, carefully, they began to share pieces of who they'd been before loss changed them. Ayanna never asked him to put away Sarah's things, never tried to erase the ghost that lived in every corner of the house. She understood that love doesn't die with the beloved, that honoring the dead is part of learning to live again. 3 months after the almost lynching, they sat together on the porch watching another desert sunset paint the sky in shades of healing. Thomas had stopped sleeping in the barn. Ayanna had stopped checking the horizons for danger every few minutes. "Sarah would have liked you," Thomas said, the first time he'd spoken his wife's name without pain clouding his voice. "I think she sent me here," Ayanna replied, her hand finding his across the weathered wood of the porch step. "Spirits sometimes do that, send help when we need it most, even if we don't know we need it." Thomas looked at her, this woman who'd been marked for death and chosen life instead, who taught him that healing was possible even for hearts that felt completely broken. "Maybe you're right. Maybe she did." And in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and somewhere in the house behind them, Sarah's spirit smiled, and finally, peacefully, let go. Thank you for riding with us through this story of loss, courage, and unexpected healing. If tales like this stir something deep in your soul, if you believe in the quiet strength of second chances, don't forget to subscribe to Tony Tells Tales.